I think one of my challenges in determining whether or not I succeed in this Republican primary is going to come out. I was just jotting down some of the things you said. Comes down to a tension between the values that I'm advocating for are deeply conservative values. But my method of wanting to get there is radical in terms of a quantum leap to a worthy destination. Not abolishing the government, but abolishing a fourth branch of government that where it ultimately exercises political power today. And there's a tension in that. And I see it in many of the Republican audiences that I talk to. I saw it in the first debate and the response to it a little bit. Is that the people who share the conservative value set that I share and I'm advocating for, it's in the name. They want to conserve, right? Yeah. Whereas what I'm talking about is getting into some of these agencies and bureaucracies, and even the swamp exists in the private sector too. Shut it down, not through incremental reform, but through a quantum leap of actually shutting it down. And so that is, I think, a methodology that is inherently in tension with the people who want to conserve rather than drive radical change.
Yes.
But my challenge back is, what happens when the things that you want to conserve no longer exist? And I think that that's something that we have lost.
Yes.
Actually, is the things that we want to conserve when they don't exist, then we have to actually create from the ground up, and that takes a quantum leap.
Yeah, it's because
to accomplish.
Do you know what I consider you? I consider you a progressive conservative.
You know, it's funny you say that. It's interesting. Progressive in the methodology, maybe.
Yes, exactly.
But conservative in the content.
Because conservative can be, country to country, person to person. It can, conservatism in the UK is very different to conservatism in the US, even, right? And the battles are very different, and the way people talk about things are very different. But I think there's sort of two fundamentally different ways to understand conservatism. I think your approach is almost looking back at what the principles the USA was originally founded upon, like those core ideas and values, and wanting to cut off the stuff that is not in line with that. So it's like a libertarian approach. It's leaning it all down and going back to the origination point, right? Whereas for other people, conservatism means maintaining the status quo. So that's the challenge you're describing. So for people who want to maintain the status quo, even if it's not serving them well, even if some of these organizations are corrupted or they're not serving a purpose or they never really had one to begin with, they still, in their mindset, are very apprehensive about those things being shut down, especially when you use that, shut it down, right? Or on the left side, they're like, abolish this thing, dismantle this thing. And it makes people go like, wait, I'm used to this thing. This has been here my whole life. If you say I want to shut down the FBI, I'm not even American. But as far as I know, the FBI has it's existed my entire life. This organization's always been there. I assume it serves a valuable purpose. Whatever, people just get used to things. And so if someone says that, it's like there's a natural reaction to it. But I think that's perhaps a battle that's going on even within conservatism itself. You have the sort of conservatives, and then you have more like progressive conservatives who are like, no, I want change, and I want massive change to achieve what conservatism was originally supposed to be. Yeah.
And that's a challenge. It's an inherent challenge, but I think that my view is we're not going to get to that destination incrementally. Not in the moment we're in. I think there might have been points in our history where that was true. But even if you think about this issue of taking on the administrative state,
it's hard.
I think that that's something that's a false belief to think that let's just take the FBI, which, by the way, this isn't a partisan point. This is the same FBI that went after Martin Luther King with really unjust threats based on incorrectly collected tapes threatening to commit suicide. That same FBI is now going after political opponents of a different persuasion, parents who show up at school board meetings, calling them and terming them domestic terrorists or otherwise. it's an institution that fundamentally, I believe, in its very system, its organization, its culture, was designed to be corrupt. Still, the J. Edgar Hoover building of the FBI that people walk into. So some Republicans, I think, have appropriate frustration with this institution today, but say, we're going to fire Christopher Wray, who's the current, head of the FBI, pretending like that's going to solve the problem, when in fact it's part of the cultural rot in an organization that's comprised, here's the tough part about it, of many good people.
Yes.
So if you try to, it's kind of the systemic racism debate, but backwards, right? If you try to pin it to individual action, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
Because it's actually the system that's broken. And I view it differently in the other context. But here, in the context of the administrative state, I view it, individual action is not the problem. It's actually the failure of the system as a whole, which means you need non-incremental change to accomplish it, which means anybody who thinks that, okay, we're going to get to that destination, but we're going to get there incrementally, they don't know they're making a false promise, but it's a false promise because you're never going to actually get there when the system reacts. That machine, every time it's like an immune system, you sort of attack it a little bit, it compensates for that wound and heals with a scar, which is worse than the original thing.
Yes.
And so that's why I would say, take the risk of overshooting, eviscerate the whole thing. And then if we've overshot, fine, we will narrowly build from scratch that which was missing. And I think that's an interesting juncture for us right now. I'm definitely representing one view of that in the Republican Party and the conservative movement.
And it's extremely important to bring those ideas to the forefront. Because it's been really stagnant for a while, right? And I think, again, that's one of the, I've talked about the inherent advantages I think conservatism has. I think one of the inherent weaknesses is this idea of maintenance of the status quo, right? Conservatism struggles with slogans. Right? If you're a progressive, there's slogans, right? Change, right? Change this thing. Like
hope and change.
Change, right? Whereas, if conservatives had a slogan, what would it be? Slow down, keep things the same, right? Like it's not really sexy and it's hard to sell, especially to younger people, because younger people typically want change. But this is the thing that's interesting, and this is why I really like what you're doing, again, because most conservatives also want change, regardless of their age. They might not want it as fast. They might want different changes or change to happen in different ways, but most people do actually
want progress.
Agree. They want progress. I think there's a misnomer even in the terms, right? People have this idea that conservatives don't want anything to be different or don't want to move forward in any way. That's absolutely not true, right? But you don't want to blow up the things that are functioning well. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to just abolish every social, cultural, traditional idea that's existed and that has been serving humanity as a whole well for a long period of time. Whereas the more progressive approach, at least in modern times, it's way more reckless than that.
That's right.
It's just, it's change for change's sake.
Right.
Let's just abolish that. Let's blow this up. Do we really only need two genders? Why don't we just have like infinite? Right. Well, do we even need the police? Like, do we need law and order? Like, what? Like, there's
even shows up in smaller and more boring contexts, like when the Democrat movement sort of said we're going to get rid of the early primary voting states. I don't know if you're familiar with how the presidential process plays out, but there's the tradition was to do Iowa and then New Hampshire. And the one that last year they just woke up and said, hey, we don't need to do it that way. And they changed it. I picked this example because it's a relatively, in the scheme of things, to most people, a boring example. But it's the attitude of just saying, hey, I'm not going to give the presumption to the status quo. I'm just going to say, if I feel like waking up on a given day and feel like it should be done differently, boom, it's going to be done differently. Change for change's sake. And I agree with you. I think that's where the content is different from the approach that I want to take with grounded in conservative values, is to say, no, there's a reason we need to make that change. But if we need to make that change and we make it just incrementally, the system is built to stop that incremental change in its tracks, such that becomes an illusion, which I think is an interesting crossroads for the conservative movement today. Are we willing to adopt the quantum leap approaches that the progressive movement brings, but with a vision of either the wrong destination or none at all? But to take that method and learn something from that method and say that's what we're actually going to adopt for driving change of the right kind towards a destination that we know is worth pursuing.